Good morning. It is Dr. Annie Clark with the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools, and this is our show, Growing Up Charter. I'm so excited. I'm joined by Mr. Brian Hayden today. He is the CEO of PA Cyber Charter School. And Brian, we're just so glad that you're here. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about our school and our relationship with the coalition and how we can all work together to benefit all of our students.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole, goal for all of us is just doing the right thing by the children of Pennsylvania and giving our parents options. So we're so glad to hear about your wonderful school that I've been able to visit on many occasions. Let's start by just talking about yourself, Brian. Just give us your background and how did you end up here?
Well, so it's a bit of a circuitous path, I guess. My background in education was government. I was a political science major and have masters in public and international affairs. And I spent the first 20 years of my career working for government. I worked for a member of Congress. I worked for a board of county commissioners. I worked for a state representative. I worked for a state agency, the Department of Community and Economic Affairs. And then in, I think, 2008, 2009, I transitioned to higher education, actually at the Community College of Beaver County, working in the president's office, helped to found their institutional research office and worked on major initiatives like that there for, I think it was 9 years. And, sort of started to realize it was a different career, different path. And I really enjoyed it. I thought I would be spending the rest of my career in community colleges, which I dearly loved and got to really appreciate and understand the value of those schools to a whole different group of students. And then I had the opportunity 6 years ago to come here to PA Cyber in this role as CEO. And I've also learned about the value of this school to the thousands and thousands of students and their families who have come here over the years. We're 22 years old right now, so we PA. Well, I'm sort of a baby to PA Cyber in terms of that. The school itself has been around for 22 years, and it's great to see the way that it's developed and grown and changed and morphed into the school it is today, and the way that we're able to serve our students and their families. And the 800 and so dedicated people at PA Cyber that work hard every day to make sure that happens.
Oh, that's great, Brian. I'm glad that you brought up your staff of your organization. And if we could talk a little bit about how you approach leadership and the structure of leadership at PA Cyber Charter School.
Well, when I got here, one of the first things that I realized is how much I didn't know, and I think that's a very important moment in a life, at least a professional life. And I spent a lot of time just visiting. I mean, visiting with people here in Midland, meeting with our union leadership, meeting with the academic leadership, the operations leadership, people who have been around a long time, people who have been here from the beginning in some respects, who really helped me to understand the history and the unique aspects of this school in terms of how it was built and why it was created and how it developed over that 15, 16 years at that point. But I also spent a lot of time around the state. We're fortunate, in addition to our headquarters here in Midland, Beaver County, we have our 9 regional offices, the stretch from Pittsburgh to Philly and everywhere in between. And I spent a lot of time out there too at the very beginning of my tenure, meeting with staff, but more importantly, meeting with families and students and face to face, and to sit down and talk to them about why did you come here, what works about the school that didn't work where you were before. I always like to tell our families how much I appreciate them being here. That we're a school of choice. And something didn't work wherever they were. Sometimes it was a little thing, sometimes it was a big thing, but something didn't work. And so I'm always hopeful that we're going to do better so they don't find themselves in a situation there. But understanding and appreciating the reasons that they chose this school, the reasons they chose cyber education, is really important to me and to all the people who work here, because we want to try to do better than where they came from. They can leave tomorrow, They can leave here, they can go to another cyber school, they can go to traditional school, they can go to brick and mortar charter school, they can go to private school, they can go back to homeschooling, whatever they want. So we really have a responsibility to understand, I think, our students and their families in very um, uh, very deep and meaningful way. And so that's, been a mixture of both meeting with staff here, and I continue to do that. I mean, and talk to the people who work here, but as well as our families and our students.
Well, that's wonderful. I know that when I've visited I haven't been to all your campuses, but the campuses that I've been to, there's a real sense of, one, excellence. That's something that I see in all of your campuses, and two, in all of your staff, a real pride in the work that they're doing. How have you cultivated that in your staff and in your different regional offices, buildings?
So I was very fortunate. I got here, that pride existed, right? The history of this school is somewhat unique. We are in Midland, Beaver County, Pennsylvania, which is as far in Pennsylvania as you can get going west without being in Ohio. We're actually closer to the Ohio border than we are the city of Pittsburgh. This is an aging steel town, and it's as many areas in Western Pennsylvania, as well as, other regions across the Commonwealth, Erie, Wilkes-Barre, places like that. There was a massive deindustrialization in the 1980s, and that led to not only a loss of tax base for school districts, but also population. People lost jobs and they had to move somewhere. And sometimes they moved an hour away, sometimes they moved south or to California. And I remember when I was graduating high school, families leaving, for those opportunities. And the school district here was forced to shut its high school down. It still maintains a K-8 school, right? There's still a Midland School District, but not a high school. They initially tuition those students to a neighboring school district. Wasn't a good match at the time, social, economic, and racial issues. And that program was ended after 3 years. The leaders of the Midland School District then were not able to find another partner in Pennsylvania. They were not able to find another public school district that was willing to take a very small number of students. So they tuitioned their kids to East Liverpool, Ohio, across the border. And I talk about that being an absolute leadership failure, for all levels of education, from the governor's office, the Department of Education, the state legislature, Democrats and Republicans, but most importantly, school districts, school boards, and superintendents who were more interested in their, I don't know what they were interested in, protecting what they perceived as being, their school district, than then serving a couple of hundred Midland students, right? And I think it was an absolute shame on this Commonwealth as an entity that these kids had to go to Ohio. Nevertheless, they did. It worked out well. When the charter school was passed, which I think is about 25 years ago now.
That's correct.
The education leaders looked at an opportunity to bring their kids back, and they didn't have. I think they didn't realize they had the resources to build a brick and mortar charter school, but they certainly could do a cyber school. And so 22 years ago they opened. They talk about the 251st student. Their original charter was for 250 students, and they got their 251st application. They called the PDE and said, what should we do? And they said, keep enrolling. And they opened with 500 kids, which at that time seemed like a remarkable number. And for those of us of a certain age to remember 22 years ago, you didn't have these nice, neat laptops. You had, computers with monitors and the tower and keyboards. There was, dial-up internet, if people can, like that. There wasn't really curriculum developed for online education, and teachers weren't taught how to teach, So, it was a really pretty remarkable period of history. And many of those people who took a risk, our staff here, who took a risk at that point to come here, some of them were not even being paid initially, right? And they, they didn't know if the school was going to exist from year to year or whatever. So that pride existed here, in terms of, wow, look at what we built here. You know,
Right.
we started literally from nothing, and have this school now that's, you know, big and successful, and it operates all over the Commonwealth. And
Yeah.
you know, we have thousands of alumni who have gone on to do amazing things.
Mhm.
You know, our teachers know how to teach, our technology department knows how to operate, you know, and maintain technology, our student support services, all those people. So I had that here. You know, it was a great position to be in. You know, I think my biggest goal was to make sure that it didn't go away, right? You know,
Yes, that's right.
and you know, and I think as an institution, and you know, coming through the pandemic and everything, you know, we've continued to prove to ourselves, you know, everybody here, all the 800 employees, the students, their families, the people who have committed themselves to this organization, that we do really well, and that we care very deeply about our students and family. We know our students and their families, and that, you know, everybody who wakes up here and comes to work every day, that's what they want to do. So it's just, I think, continuing this really interesting and an important history, as we go forward to, you know, into the third decade of PA Cyber.
That's wonderful.
Mm.
You know, when I had first come into this position in April, I mean, one of the first things I said was I wasn't as well versed in cyber charter schools as I would have liked to been. I had spent 22 years in a brick and mortar building. And one of the things I found very interesting when I visited your Harrisburg campus was you had just finished up an art night, a music and art night.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? I mean, how do these events come to be? You know, with your students, and what other events do you have with your students?
So, you know, we realize people come to school to learn, right? So the classroom experience is the, you know, the foundation of what we do. But you know, we like to talk about, we're a school, not a program, right? We're not like a cyber program that a traditional school has. So we have the responsibility to make sure our students have a full, you know, school experience. So yes, clearly, you know, we're focused on what happens between 8 to 4 in the classroom, and you know, and to make sure that our kids have excellent teaching, excellent curriculum, excellent resources and support. But school is more than that, right? It's field trips, it's clubs, it's you know, experiences, you know, outside of the classroom, and it's opportunity to meet other kids. So, you know, we have something called Family Link, and Family Link provides, you know, probably 600 activities throughout the year to our students. You know, I like to say that's everything from a 2-day Battle of Gettysburg tour, to visits to a potato chip factory,
Yes.
and everything in between. So, you know, we have them for different ages, we have them for different interests. There are indoor activities, outdoor activities, you know, ice skating, skiing, but also, you know, opportunities to go to see the Nutcracker, or, you know, at the Pittsburgh Ballet. In addition to that, we have these 9 regional offices that are, you know, in north and south of Pittsburgh, Erie, State College, Harrisburg, Philadelphia, Wilkes-Barre, and Allentown. And those are places with, you know, obviously they're also for enrollment and orientation for our students when they come in, because one of the requirements we have is every family must appear in person to be enrolled at this school. We think it's really important for us to meet them and then to meet us, and we really encourage them to bring their children with them, so that, you know, that we have an opportunity to meet with them also, and for them to understand the responsibility of school. But the other things, you know, are the activities. So we have Art Reach, a program we call, and you know, that's you know, painting to singing. We've had ukulele bands, and even some plays that the kids write and things like that. But you know, they come in a couple days a week, and they have an opportunity to do that. We've got STEM programming in our regional offices. We had a really thing happen last week for our littlest kids, our K-5 kids. They had a little veterinary program, and these
Aw.
pictures are absolutely charming. They're in little white lab coats, and they have stuffed animals, and they're learning how to be a vet. So, you know, you also have the college, you know, you're already talking college and career at that
Yes.
age. But we also use it for dances. We use it for bingo. You know, we have high school dances in our regional offices, and you know, we have bingo games, and we have pizza nights and game nights and everything like that. So, our students are learning outside of the classroom, but they're also developing relationships. It comes to that question, well, what about socialization or networking? Well, there it is right there.
Yes.
We also have dozens of clubs. We have elementary, middle school, and high school clubs, and that's everything from, cooking clubs to Bible clubs to outdoor clubs. I actually facilitated a club on Model United Nations for high school students because it was a
Mm,
passion of mine in my youth, and an opportunity for me to engage with a dozen or so kids on a regular basis. So we want to make sure that all of our students have opportunities to write for the newspaper, to be in student council, to go to a Christmas dance or whatever, and participate in field trips so that they have the full school experience. Because the kids that come here, like, this is their school. They wear,
yes.
we have Archie, who's behind me, he's our mascot.
Yeah.
They wear their t-shirts and hoodies, and they see PA Cyber as the place they go to school, and they're proud to be PA Cyber students. So we want to make sure that they have that opportunity to have a full, complete, comprehensive school experience.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I felt like that even about my charter school, that I wanted any student who attended our school to have that full experience, that they would have at any school. That it
Right.
wouldn't just be like, oh, that's an urban education. No, that's a high quality education,
Right.
regardless of where it is. The other thing I found about children, and this goes to your point, is that children don't know anything different.
Right.
If you've
Yep.
had a student enroll there in kindergarten, which I believe probably a lot do,
Right.
and then continue throughout, that they believe that is school. They don't realize that there is they might see a building, but they don't really understand that's a brick and mortar building or is traditional. They just know that's their school, that's their teacher, that's their school leader.
Well, even more to that, we a few years ago, National Public Radio did a story on us in our Erie office, because they had done a whole multi-month reporting on after the Trump election, believe it or not, about blue communities that voted red, and Erie was one of them. So they spent a lot of time in Erie interviewing, business owners and social services agency and government people. Well, they start talking about education, and they heard about us. So they came out and interviewed a large group of our family and students
Wow.
in our Erie office. And, the reporter asked, the kids, they go, well, do you think this is school or something like this? And there was a little boy who was maybe 10 years old, and he had gone to traditional schools before he came to PA Cyber. And his complete response was, oh, I don't see really any difference at all. He said, in my old school, I raised my hand like this, right?
Yeah.
In my new school, I hit a button and a little, virtual hand comes up. He says, but he goes, I don't really see a difference. And, the reporter kind of stopped for a minute, like I stopped for a minute. And I thought, like, well, that's a pretty profound statement from a kid,
Absolutely.
who is being completely honest and was unprompted. So you're right, like, they see this as school, and certainly this generation, whatever they're
Yes.
called, I think I heard Zillennials was a new
Yes.
name or something like that, right? The screen, the virtual experiences are so much a part of their life.
Yes.
Their even their social life and so forth. So they don't see it as being substandard or being a poor alternative. In fact, I think for many of them, they see it's quite the opposite. It's a better option than what they might have in a traditional setting.
Well, I think that's absolutely true, because if you think of us as adult learners, who go on to get those, graduate degrees, many times we will opt for the school that does have online classes because of the convenience of it.
Right.
If you're working 50 hours running a school or 60 hours running a school, the last thing you want to do is drive to a campus,
Right.
try to find a parking space,
Yes.
sit there, then drive home. If you can, go to that online learning platform, it's very convenient.
Right.
And nor do I feel, or would someone to tell me that my degree was lesser
Right.
because I took online classes versus I drove and inconvenienced myself to drive, well, I went to Point Park for my graduate work. And so I couldn't have driven to Pittsburgh. So I got the advantage of that. And I'm very proud of their education department that I got to go there. So I agree with you. What education was 50 years ago, what it was even 5 years ago before this pandemic, and what it is now is so completely different. And what we all need, our teachers, our students, our families, is so much different. And I do think that was the huge advantage to our cyber schools and our cyber families. You guys were already there. You were
Right,
already doing it. And so you were able to transition. Well, you didn't have to transition
right,
because that was your platform.
right.
How do you think that became an advantage for your students in the context of learning?
So, that whole, I think for decades, we're going to be thinking about what happened on March 13th of 2020, right? Like
Right.
that's for my generation, that's our, the day that we remember, like, other people remembered Pearl Harbor or the day Kennedy was shot, right? Things that aren't in our, my personal
Right.
memory, but Friday the 13th too, no less, if, to make it even more
Yes, that's
relevant.
right.
But I think we've talked about this. Like I was like we in Amazon were ready for for the pandemic. And it was it was a change. It was a struggle. Like I'm not going to try to diminish the impact it had on our employees, especially who were now suddenly home with their spouses, partners, their children, and all those things were
Right.
going on. But in terms of what we did, right, that part didn't really change that much for the teaching. And I've talked about, we had the 2 decades of experience then, right? We had the 2 decades of teachers teaching online, understanding we didn't use Zoom, right? We used, these more sophisticated learning platforms because we didn't
Yes.
have to do it like that. We were ready to go. But it wasn't, so it was the classroom, right? Or, our teachers were prepared for the classroom, but was everything else that supports the classroom, our counselors, our academic advisors, the enrollment services people. I talk about our tech team, that had to keep this all running and operating through this process. And, because this is what we are, we don't have one or two tech people, we have a couple dozen tech people that
Yes.
their entire workday is committed to operating this. So when that transition was made, it was seamless to the student. And this isn't a criticism for traditional schools, but it
No.
certainly wasn't seamless to them, for
That's right.
that. And we had already designed into our curriculum the option for live teaching, and that was something that many families wanted, for their kids, regardless if they were here or somewhere else. And even our blended teaching, which is more self-paced, we had teachers that are dedicated to those courses, and they have a limited number of students, and they have a process in place. So that we were ready to go. But was also everything else. Our regional offices quickly transitioned to being virtual. Our field trips transitioned to being virtual. So we
Yes.
didn't, our clubs to virtual, our newspaper, all those things. So our students weren't losing completely those experiences. And we had many families tell us throughout and even afterwards is the one consistency in their
Yes.
kids' life was PA soccer. That
Mhm.
was it, because soccer was canceled.
Yes.
The parents were home, the older siblings may be back from college. They couldn't just go to grandma's house,
Right.
for Sunday dinner or those things. But having us, do what we did and do the best we could, was really, really important to those families. And I think that's what drove a lot of the enrollments, to cyber
Yes.
schools across Pennsylvania. Um, Throughout that period. So it was interesting, but even we learned some things from that too, right? It was, our tagline is the learning never stops. And
That's
I
right.
like to say that starts with me and goes, through everybody else involved in this organization. But, we learned some things that we've, changed and adapted to as we've moved back to what is considered normal now. And I think that is something that charter schools generally, both brick and mortar and cyber, are much better at, is kind of being self-reflective or introspective,
Yes.
and then, and being able to act on them too. It's like, oh, wait, we've been doing this for 10 years. It doesn't seem to make work. Let's stop doing it that way and try
Yes.
it this way. So, we're really proud of that too, and how that, that all developed, and now that we're back to where we are, and our, our employees' families are back to normal, and our families are back to normal. Our students and their families, that, we're back up and operating. But we've made some changes, which we think are positive things based on what we learned during the pandemic.
Yes, that's great. I didn't even think about that, it did have a change for you as well.
Right.
Like I knew that, so to hear even your perspective on that there was a change for our cyber schools that affected their teachers and their staff, and how that you did things. And I'm glad that you shared that. I always say, stop doing the work long enough to know why you're doing the work.
Right.
And this is something we all have to force ourselves to do. I'm thinking about with so many things happening, with our students and the growth. We have had tremendous growth since the beginning of the pandemic in all of our charter schools, especially our cyber charter schools, but even in our brick and mortar, and across Pennsylvania, we have, thousands. We really can't get an accurate number. It's approximately around 20,000 students on waiting lists.
Right.
Did your enrollment stay up? Does it continue to grow?
It's more or less leveled, which is, we're very comfortable with that. We under our charter renewal, which ironically took place on July 1st of 2020, even though it had been negotiated before, we do have a parameter, and of 11,677 students, and so we've stayed close to that. During the pandemic, we had wait lists which weren't great, but we work through those, and no, we don't. And we're very comfortable that we have the teachers in place, the technology in place, the supports in place for a school of our size. And we think that that has allowed us to continue to provide consistency and stability, because sometimes large growth can be
That's right.
a challenge to itself, right? And
That's right.
so I think we know where we are as a school, and we're very comfortable and happy with who we've become, and who we think will be in the future. I think enrollments are going to be challenging for everybody, because if you look at the trajectory of 18 and unders in Pennsylvania, it's not going in a positive place. So as a Commonwealth, the number of students that are eligible to be in school, regardless of the school, is not growing, and even in terms of national comparisons. So like, our goal is to build a school that is stable and can operate at this level, and provide the best education possible.
I think that's very meaningful. I think that's great that it's true for your school as a cyber school, and it's true of brick and mortar schools. Like, part of that writing that charter, at least initially, is you sort of have an idea of how many students you want. I think you guys were you the first cyber school, or?
First or second, records weren't great then, but we're certainly, on the ground level. At that time, I believe, if I'm not wrong, that the school districts were authorizing cyber schools, and then at some point shortly thereafter, that transitioned to the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So it's a little tricky to find, like a number one and a number two, but we're in that very first group. So
I'm just thinking, if you could go back and speak to the leaders and be like, you think 500's a lot. Wait to see what you become,
right.
In the future. It would have been hard to probably believe that.
Right, and I think people didn't envision, because again, like I talked about, like where technology was 22 years ago.
Yes.
It wasn't omnipresent in our lives the way it is, and or is accessible, or as robust as it has become, and I know there's still parts of the state. I mean, we have families that struggle with that, but most people have high quality internet access now. The computers themselves have gotten, both more powerful and smaller. You can ship them out in the FedEx box, right? And you have those 2 decades plus of learning on how to teach, how to create curriculum for an online environment. and how to learn in an online environment. And I think that's something that, we can't forget either. It's, to learn, it's both the teaching and the learning, right? So
Right.
both ends of that, both the people on the teaching side and the people on the learning side have to have a level of proficiency that, I don't think existed, 22, 23 years ago, right?
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I 1,000% on that. You talked a little bit earlier about just your relationship with legislators, throughout your career. I'd like to go back to that for just a minute and ask you about how does those relationships, or if you're talking to another school leader, which is probably who's going to be watching this,
Right.
what is the importance for our school leaders to develop those relationships with legislators? Like, what do you think is important about that?
So my personal opinion of my role as CEO is that advocacy and relationship building is the most important thing that I do. And I say that in part perhaps because I'm not a professional educator, right? So, PA Cyber is fortunate to have, dozens and dozens of high qualified education professionals, from our academic leadership team to principals, and then, clearly the teachers and those who support teachers. So, their job, I think, is to make sure that the classrooms are the best that they can be, the classroom experience and so forth.
Mhm.
I think my job is to tell our story, right? And especially in the cyber world, I think over the last decade, collectively, cyber schools lost the narrative. And some of that for legitimate reasons, some of that for not so legitimate reasons. There were clearly bad actors out there that I mean, there are bad actors everywhere, but including in
Yes.
the cyber world, right? And so this perception that we were failing our students, that we were overfunded, that we didn't care about teaching as much as we did about kind of empire building, or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
that was out there. And we let everybody else tell our story. That's what I said. We let legislators tell our story, we let governors tell our story, we let the PSEA tell our story, we let the superintendents, the business officers, everybody else tell our story except us, right? And so when I got here, I thought, well, you're right, I'd spent 20 years in government. I had a bit of a sense of how that part of the world works. And I said, our job is to tell our story, but our story isn't my story, right? I always say I get paid like really good money to go out and tell the story. The story is really our students and their families. And to go back to your first question, or at least the initial part of this interview, about learning about those families, like the little boy in Erie, right? I have hundreds and hundreds of those stories in my mind, filling it up,
Yes.
about why students come here, about, how families have been supported and how we've led to success. And so, using that, I've spent a lot of time and can spend a lot of time talking to legislators, talking to the media, talking to, our colleagues and the other professional organizations around Pennsylvania, to explain like why students are here.
Mm,
Students don't come here to hide, right?
right.
They don't come here, for some kind of nefarious reason. They don't necessarily come here because they're socially awkward or anything like that. They come here because they want a different, better kind of education for
Right.
them, right?
Right.
And and even statistically, we're always going to be a small part of public education in Pennsylvania, right? We're not, most kids are going to get on a yellow school bus and go to a traditional brick and mortar school. That's because that's how we learn, right? That's how I learned, probably how you learned. But for the tens of thousands of students that come to cyber charter schools across Pennsylvania, that didn't work for them. And we need to explain to all of those other people why our families are here, why our students are here, how they're succeeding, how they're doing well. And that takes a lot of work. You don't do that
Mhm.
with a newsletter. You don't do that with a
Yes,
30-second
that's right.
commercial, right? That's all helpful. You do that, driving along the turnpike, going into Harrisburg, sitting down with legislators, sitting down with the governor's office, sitting down with, the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and telling our story, and not just and telling our students' story. That's what I always say, telling our
Yes.
students' story, right? And not just to legislators or administration officials who were friendly to us, but to
Yeah.
those who question and that, and
Right.
I, and that, and you can start to see, like, you can watch their faces, when you tell a
Right.
story about, let me tell you about Bobby, let me tell you
Yeah.
about, Abigail, right? And, they're like, oh, well, that's not what we thought, right? That's not what we were told. And I'm like, well, no, of course not. That's not what
Right.
it is. We started here, and I know the coalition is also doing this now. We have a group of parent advocates
Yes.
that we out of our regional offices, and we send them out all the to meet with legislators, often in their district offices at home, or
Yes.
if you go to church with one, if your kid plays
That's right.
football with them, right? If you see them at the Target, I don't know,
Yes.
tell your story. And I've seen legislators who have publicly opposed us or been critical.
Yes.
When they hear that story, and I always say, you never argue with a mom, right? So if a mom
Right.
says, the public school didn't work for us, but PA Cyber is, I've seen them, like, and I've even had them say to me, like, wow, we didn't think about it that way.
That's right.
Now they still may have questions about financing or test scores or whatever, and that's okay, right? That's, we're responsible for that. But they are slowly but surely, and I think, collectively, we, through the coalition and through, us and other cyber charter schools and traditional brick and mortar charter schools are trying to have started to change that narrative a bit, and that's what we're going to continue to do. As we have all new leaders on the education committees. We're, next Tuesday, we're getting a new governor, a new secretary of education, and
Yeah.
so forth. So it starts again,
Yeah.
with that. And, but to me, that's the most fun part of this job. Like, when I get to
Mm.
go out and talk to somebody about, our students, our families, their successes, their challenges, why they're here, why this works for them, why this is so important for them. To me, that gives me energy in life,
Mm.
in a way that, I think it's important for all school leaders to talk about their schools. I mean, I'm here because I believe in this school. I'm here
Yeah.
because I believe and I know it has made massive, important differences in kids' life.
Yeah.
Um, that maybe they would have gotten to where they are without PA Cyber, which can't prove a negative, but we know they got to where they are because of PA Cyber.
Yeah.
And that where they are, I talk about that all the time. Yeah, we had a kid go to Princeton last year, right? He's
Yeah.
doing wonderfully there, fit in. But it's just as important, that the kids that are going to stay on the family farm, right? The kids that are going to go to community college to become a nurse, the kids that are going to go into the workforce, or, we have hundreds of pregnant or teen moms that come here every year because
Mhm.
this is, I think, a safer place for them to go to school, right? Uh,
Right.
but they leave with a high school diploma.
That's right.
So, and every statistic in the world, every study in the world tells you that not having a high
Absolutely.
school diploma is a disadvantage for the rest of your life.
That's
And,
right.
and yes, you can go on and get a GED, which I have all the respect in the world for those people, because I think getting a GED is harder than getting a high school diploma, and you do it at a different point. But, but our goal is to get them out of here with a high school diploma. And so whatever they're going to do, 6 months after they graduate, it's already better. But what they're going to do 6 years after they graduate, when maybe they want to change careers or go back to school or do something differently, they got their high school diploma, and that is what's so incredibly important for us. And but so that's the story to tell too, right? These kids,
Yes.
they're out there, and from all different places. I kind of like to say, I think the large statewide cyber charter schools are probably the most diverse schools in Pennsylvania, because,
Absolutely.
right, we've got kids from inner city Philadelphia, we've got kids from the rich white suburbs of Pittsburgh. I was talking about, we've got the rural kids that, you drive across the turnpike and you see that little white church, off to the side. I've driven past that little white church,
Yeah.
so we've got the rural kids, we've got, kids that, I think the last count in our English language learners that come from 13 different languages. Like I said, we've got homeless kids, we've got, gifted kids, we've got 2,500 special ed kids, we've got everything,
Yeah.
everything, kids who are in foster care, kids who, are in in solid traditional homes. We've got kids whose families are, from the right, the left, the middle, and everything in between,
That's right.
and when they're here together in a classroom or in a club or anything like that, can't tell the difference, right? They're just kids trying to learn. And I believe that is an additional value of cyber education.
Yes.
I think about when I went to the school that I went to, everybody knew everybody's background. They knew what neighborhood you lived in. They knew what car your parents drove. They knew all those things, right? And for better or for worse, we were judged or categorized for that. I truly believe that, part of the reason that our kids get along is they don't see that. Like, they don't know, if your house is big or little. They don't know if your car is brand new or old. They don't know if your parents are, this or that. All they see is what we see right now. There's another kid on the screen talking about whatever it is that kids talk about. And I think that really helps to kind of equalize, our students within the classroom in a way that I think sometimes, and again, that's not a criticism, it's an observation, that sometimes traditional public schools do not.
I agree 100%. I definitely see that. We have a lot of people that we know in common, Brian, because of being one in charter schools, one in the coalition. One thing that our peers have said about you is that you're so authentic.
Well,
I found this to be true as well when I visited you, and you had these just really meaningful stories about children from all over the Commonwealth.
Right.
And I was really moved by that. Our colleague Shantae, when she first met you, I mean, that was one of the first things that she said when we walked away, is she said, that she just could feel your authenticity about students. And so I just wanted to share that with you, just because, a lot of times we hear different things, but we don't always hear what makes us special as school leaders, and what people see. So I think that you're a great representation of what a cyber school leader should be. And you bring those attributes. So when you think about that authenticity, how do you try to bring that out in your other school leaders that you surround?
Well, one of the things that, I noted when I got here, were even simple things like, employees, like leaders clumping together at public events, right? And I think some of this goes back to my 20 years in government, right? And working for elected officials, because, your job is to sell yourself or who you're working for. And, I'm like, well, we got a room full of kids, go out and talk to them, go out and talk to their parents. And, and that was one of the things, and we've really grown as an organization that way, in terms of that. I've started to, if I'm in this office in Midland or any office, like I've happened a couple times today, if there's a family that is enrolling, I knock on the door and walk in and just sit down and say, hey, I'm Brian Hayden, I'm the school CEO. Welcome, and what grade are you in, what school do you go to? And a lot of these parents especially are like, I mean, you're the CEO and you're just walking in to talk to us. Like, well, yeah, I saw you here, and I want to welcome you. I had we were at a National Honor Society induction in right before the holidays, and this father came up to me and he says, I don't know if you remember us. He says, but 3-4 years ago, we were in the Warrendale office for an enrollment appointment, and you came over and talked to us. And he said that made such a big impression that, you aren't like a superintendent cloistered in an, in an administrative wing somewhere. He said, and I know this is going to sound silly, like I'm in a tie today because of this, but I typically dress more casually, like colors. And he said the fact that you just kind of walked in, you didn't look like, you were whatever, an executive or something, and sat down with us and talked to us and asked some questions about, why we were coming here, and, what my daughter, and she's graduating this year. So success, right? We accomplished that. But, he remembered that, like 4 years later. And so, I tell those stories around here because you never know what interaction a principal, an administrator, even the people who answer phones or meet people in the door, we are, they are our customers, right? They're our students, but they are our customers because we're schools of choice and they're selecting us over a whole lot of other options, And I think because of that, I've tried to, instill in everybody, we have a responsibility to treat them like good customers, and to take an interest in them and to be happy that they're here and, to be, appreciative of them and to sit and just talk for a few minutes,
Yes,
I mean, I will argue, one of the reasons I think it's so critical that, that in PA Cyber's model that we have all of these buildings, not only here and across the state is how else would I have that opportunity?
that's right.
How else would our principals have that opportunity? How else would, any of the other staff, we have teachers in some of these buildings and that to have the opportunity. I mean, this is fine that we're talking like this,
Yes,
but to sit down like I did with a dad and his daughter,
that's right.
and chat about why she was here. And then, she says, oh, my friend's thinking of coming here too. And I'm like,
Oh,
great, or earlier in the week, I was in the Warrendale office and there was a family there and to sit down and just, chat with them a little bit. I don't know how you cannot do that. You know what I mean? And so, I appreciate, you saying that and the colleagues, and I appreciate, some of the parents saying that, but to me, that is who we should be as a
mhm,
cyber charter school, certainly as PA Cyber. I think that's who I should be as a leader.
yes,
It's nice that I can talk to the chairman of the education committee or to talk to you or, to talk to my board. But if I can't take the same or more energy with
that's right.
the people who come here,
Mhm,
you talked about the art nights, to try to visit those and to see the exciting things that our kids are doing. I'm building my own little art collection here in the building.
yes,
If
it's beautiful.
Right, thank you. If I like something, especially, I'll ask the student if we can have it. We have it framed and hanging in the hallway here. So, all of that to me is really important. And I think the most important thing that an education leader can do is to be
Yes,
accessible, to be available, to be, authentic. I'd like to think we all are, but I appreciate that term. And that, when we talk to students and families, it's not because we think we have to or we should, but because we want
mhm,
to
that's
and
right.
we choose to. And those are the best days here for me. When I walk out of a regional office or a field trip or an event and, have talked to and seen and, and engaged with our kids and their families, that's the best day here at PA Cyber.
Oh, that was great. I really appreciate that. And I know that's true to you. And I do also believe being a school leader for a long time, that was the most important work that I ever did was to meet parents and talk with students. And, uh, that's so important to all schools.
Right.
This was great conversation,
Thank you.
Brian. I hope that you will come back and talk to me again soon.
Anytime.
And
Yes.
the next time we would talk, I really would like to talk about higher education, just because the Pennsylvania Coalition in the next 6 months will be working with different colleges and universities across the Commonwealth to learn from them, and then also for them to learn from us, because our charter schools are very much different than they were before.
Right.
So I would love for you to talk to me about that experience you've had in higher education and how does that correlate back to our charter schools?
Right. Absolutely. And I think I've said that I think there are more similarities between higher ed and charter schools, even from a business model, right? We're all tuition driven, right? So we have to budget in the same way that institution of higher learning does. I also think we're both more flexible and innovative in terms of what we do, because colleges, post-secondary institutions, in order to stay successful and relevant, they got to keep doing things differently. And they've really been challenged by online. It's, as you pointed out, you're going to, I didn't know you went to Point Park, by the way, but you going to Point Park, living in York. And
Yes,
so I think, the schools that were more quick to adapt to online, post-secondary schools that adapted to online education. And that's not even including the schools that were only online education, right? The big online colleges and universities that came out 10 years ago, that that they also understand the need to keep doing things differently and to be reflective and thoughtful about how they do business, so that they can remain relevant and continue to attract students that are successful. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great initiative of the coalition and your leadership.
thank you so much. Well, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it, Brian. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity. And again, I want to compliment you and your staff on the amazing work that you're doing on behalf of all the charter schools around Pennsylvania.
Oh, thank you, Brian. I really
Great.
appreciate it.
Great. Have a great day.
You too.